and then present it in that bold empirical data. I think that is so important.
Well, let me then ask you about what you think, and before I move there, because you have also contributed to that, why is that important? Because ultimately, you'd always assume that the people have seen what is happening. They've seen the monies being mentioned. They've seen that there's really no evidence of what is. There's constant reports about how things are promised, not delivered, yet money is taken, lots of money is mentioned, but the delivery of small issues become. Is that not enough? Why do you need a whole opposition research?
Well, the thing is that there's a space within which this debate takes place, and the landscape now is so transient. Social media and radio and the newspapers are almost gone now. So it is going to be a matter of you said, he said, and then there's no proper context within which you can make a forceful argument. I think what Dr. Tunidu said was empirical data. So you don't come and say, well, you made a loss, we made profit, but then you come back and say, well, we had this amount of money, we use it for all these projects, you said all this in opposition, these were all your policies in government, this is how much per capita it costs you to deliver on each of your projects. And when you sit here and talk about corruption and inflation, we are looking at your record now and tell the Ghanaian people you're not deserving of a re-election because this is your track record and it's abysmal. That is the way you look at things like this, because then you provide proper empirical data. And there's a science of credibility, which says that when people use numbers, not talk, when people use numbers and refer to data, empirical data, it has more credibility than arguing and you did this and you did that. So I think people remember those, and it has more credibility when you argue with facts and data and empirical evidence. So I think that will be remarkable, really, because you see, you're looking at a situation where you have a government, right, that says that, okay, we were on a good pedestal until COVID hit. Then you go back and you realize that those good periods that they lay claim to was actually a policy that was started by a previous government, which ran all the way into 2019. So 2020 going forward was probably where you see where their policy outlook will look like. And 2020, 2021, 2022, we're in 2023, isn't it? One of the biggest arguments they make is the fact that COVID disrupted the forward march. But then you come back and that in order to put Ghana back on the forward march, the World Bank, the IMF, Bank of Ghana, Ghanaians donated money to cushion the government in order not to suffer the consequences of COVID. So billions and billions get doled out in order to cushion the economy and the government so they don't make the excuses they are making now. Okay? So all that money is given to them. Aside that, with all of that, they still came back to say that COVID is the reason why we are where we are. Then they moved to the next, which is the Ukraine Russia war. Look, do you know that for the first time in the history of Ghana, because of the Russia-Ukraine war, Ghana for the first time scored a positive trade balance with Russia. So, in fact, in technical terms, the Russian war benefited Ghana for the first time because for the first time we got a positive trade balance with Russia. You can talk about Ukraine. What do we get from Ukraine? Ghana exports, I think, manganese or whatever it is to Ukraine. If you look at the statistics, the Ghana economic outlook looks better with the war in Ukraine and Russia because our trade got better. So you look at all of these empirical data and you say you cannot say this because this is the fact. You can't blame Russia and Ukraine because you, for the first time, scored a positive trade balance with Russia. Okay, Russia is always exporting things to Ghana. For the first time, you got a positive balance. You can't say that in economics as negative. So I think this is so important because a lot of the proper debate get mixed up in he said, he claims, and all of that. I think that, and at this point, what are we talking about? Bank of Ghana is open 60 billion, and you have intellectuals that says that an organization headed by human beings that makes losses of 60 billion. Okay, Ghana is going to the IMF to get what? 300 million. We're getting 3 billion, but that's not guaranteed. The 3 billion is in the hope that we can fulfill specific requirements, right? What we have got in the bag now is $300 million. You have one institution, that has managed to spectacularly make losses of 60 billion. That is almost 6 billion, 2 times the money you're seeking from IMF. And the whole nation has been asked to wait for the IMF program for almost 1.5 years because it will solve our problem. But if you have one agency that makes losses that is twice the money you're looking for, you can empirically then say that that money will do nothing to the economy. So long as the same people are in office, it will make no dent in the forward march of the economy. You have one institution. Listen to this, Senator. How much is the amount of money they are using to build an office? Bank of Ghana.
I think $250 million, yes.
Okay. How much is that in dollars? So once again, that organization that is making losses, okay, has found a wisdom to invest in a new office. Think about this. You run a company, you are in the red. You can't make profit. You've made losses that, let's say you are a subsidiary of a big conglomerate. Your losses is bigger than the entire group's revenue. Okay? And then you say that as part of your forward march, you want to invest in a new office. The subsidiary that has made losses that is over and above that of the entire group wants to build a new office. What's the reason? Because there are cracks. There are cracks in the existing office. I hear other accusations that we're getting ready to have an office that can accommodate the echo. Do you remember when they were building Jubilee House? Do you remember the justification for it? That the Osu Castle was in the path of a massive earthquake zone. Okay? The last time I spoke to you, I talked to you about the theory of consistency and justification. That people will always find reasons to justify their conduct. And this is not an exception. The only way to defeat that kind of mindset is empirical evidence. That's why I 100% agree with Dr. Tony Edu. It's always so refreshing to listen to him, to be honest.
Well, having said that, then let's move on to the other issue I discussed with him. What your own thoughts on what is ECOWAS's approach to Niger? Now, at least, clerics in Nigeria have been able to convince the junta in Niger to agree to have talks with ECOWAS. But ECOWAS is still talking about intervention to forcefully take out the junta. What do you think?
You know, sometimes I listen to Ghana and I think, like, when it comes to military, we have one of the most beautiful militaries. But Ghana hasn't gone to war forever. Okay? the modern concept of war is not. We have what? Only 15,000 soldiers, Senna. Ghana's military strength is only 15,000. Go to Ukraine and see how many the rate at which they burn soldiers in the war front, because the dynamics of war has changed. So when you start punching and bragging that you're going to war, you're going to war. Even if Ghana donated its own military, you have a coup that appears to be very popular with a lot of young people who can be trained in less than 6 months and take up arms and join the war. So it's a more complicated scenario. But you see, Senna, to be able to understand what is happening, I personally don't have a side in this war. First of all, because I think that Africa is being recolonized again. Africa is being colonized again, right under our eyes.
Recolonization.
Yes. And unfortunately, we don't have the sophistication of leadership to notice it. Why do I say that? To be able to explain the conflict in Niger, we might look at it, it's just a conflict in Niger, it's just a conflict in Burkina Faso, it's just a conflict in Mali, or probably a conflict in how do you call it, Chad. Is that not the same thing we said about the Sahel region? It's just the conflict, the terrorism issue is only in the Sahel region. Now, you heard the president when he met the U.S. Secretary of State. Wagner is on our border and we are so worried and all of that. So we always, typical of we black people, we don't think beyond our community, ourselves. We don't look at the bigger picture. Listen, to be able to understand this conflict in Niger, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in the Central African Republic, in Chad, you need to understand the international system. This is not a Mali ECOWAS issue. This plays well into the international system and geopolitics. Listen, the international system is made up of two protagonists. The realist, who believes that, look, at the end of the day, no matter the rules, no matter the laws, no matter whatever it is, the world will come down to countries' interest. That is period. The other the protagonists in the international system are the libertarians, the Western countries, who believe that cooperation, laws are the best way to rule the world and to avoid conflict. Who are the realist countries in this world? Russia, China, Iran, Iraq, and the rest. Who are the libertarians? They are led by America, Europe, and the rest. Let's look at these international systems, and then what are the international? And then it's also made up of international organizations within the international system. We have the United Nations. You realize that Ghana is always contributing troops to the United Nations, right? So they are all part of the international system. We have the EU. We have organizations like NATO. We have AU, and then we have ECOWAS. So all these form part of the international system, each of them pursuing either libertarian or realist interests. Now, if you look at the problems in Africa as we speak, you realize that for all the coups in Mali, Burkina, and Niger, there appears to be a very strong hand of Russia in that. Most of them tend to support or tend to align with Russia, who belongs to the realist side of the international system. And they are in there with China. China has a very simple strategy in Africa or in the global view. What is their strategy? The strategy is that, listen, you have to wait for your time. China wants to be the world superpower. You have to bid your time and you have to build alliances. In fact, one of the most powerful stratagems of the Chinese intelligence policy is that you always have to try to kill your enemy with a borrowed sword. And you see the alliance, the very tight alliance between Russia and China, right, in the international system. So if you see Russia targeting the Francophone countries, they're in there with the Chinese. Okay? They're absolutely in there with the Chinese. But why is it that it's only the Francophone countries? When you see the war in Ukraine, when France was neutral, they had no issue. Now, once France got fully back in support of the war in Ukraine, first you see the ease with which demonstrations pop up in France. And not just that, the world is looking the world is looking at Africa as being the home of over 60 or 45% of the global resources that the world needs. Out of the global resources, Africa controls 40% of it. So there's a scramble from the world, both the realists and the libertarians, to control the wealth and the resources in Africa. This time, they're using what I call deniable conflict. All these conflicts you see have the footprints of either the libertarians, the Americans and the Europeans, or the realists, the Chinese and the Russians. So you look at what is happening in Niger, for example. It's all up to uranium, right? France is supporting and donating equipment and all of that to the war in Ukraine. China wants to make sure that they have a hold on our resources, but are not interested in a direct conflict. So therefore, if Russia could help them curtail, Russia supplies, before the war, was one of the biggest suppliers of energy to Europe, right? Which has been curtailed because of the war in Ukraine. So the world now looks forward to other sources of getting their energy. France was one of the biggest beneficiaries of trade partners in energy with Russia. So Russia realized if they can cut the power, because France also supplies power to a lot of European countries, just like we supply power to Cote d'Ivoire and the rest. So one of the bases for which France generates power is from Niger. So if Russia could find a way to curtail the supply of uranium, you know that as we speak, Nigeria is excited about this war, or is not excited, depending on how you look at it, because there's a pipeline. Okay, there's a pipeline from Nigeria that's supposed to pass through Niger to go and supply power energy to Europe. Okay, so in this conflict, Niger is in a very strategic position. First, because if there's conflict in Niger, Nigeria's project will not to supply through pipelines through Niger to Europe will not work. Russia does not want that, because if Europe becomes self-sufficient with their power supplies, they are screwed, both in the war and in the economy. So what did they do? They found a way to get Niger to curtail the supply through this coup d'etat, in my opinion. The supply of uranium, which supplies the bulk of France's power. Uranium is used to power energy in France. So therefore, if Russia could curtail that, and if they could start a conflict, or if there's any conflict that stops this whole Western pipeline project, France and the West are squeezed. So this is a war or conflict of interest. My problem with our African leaders, like our president, at least one can say that Nigeria is in a hurry to restore peace or a semblance of it in Niger because they are interested in their pipeline that has to go through Niger. And billions of dollars are at stake here. Russia is in this because if they can cripple the French influence or French access to both the pipeline and to the uranium, they can also win in Russia against the West. What is Ghana's strategic interest in joining this conflict? The president of Ghana, what is the reason why he wants to get, everybody is getting something out of it, okay? if you look at what is happening in Ghana, once again, we in Niger or in the sub-region, once again, typical of us, we think, this is not about us. This conflict is in the Francophone area. But let me explain to you one thing. You see, when you want to pick a fight, you pick a fight that you can win. The West African countries are littered with Francophone countries, isn't it? I think Ghana and Nigeria are the only Anglophone countries.
I think Liberia, Sierra Leone too.
Liberia, okay, those, major players, but let's add that. But if you look at Ghana and Nigeria, we are almost always, even though we are part of the non-aligned movement in the international system, we are very aligned to the West. So if you start a conflict in Ghana or Nigeria, chances are that you're going to get the entire Western countries coming in. China and Russia do not want that. So you isolate Ghana and Nigeria and the other smaller countries. You start the conflict around them. You seem to be dealing with only France, because France is the only one that has been eating from these countries since time immemorial. Their whole life depends on how much they can exploit from their Francophone countries. So don't start a conflict that immediately the Portuguese, the British, the Americans all will begin to fall in when you touch the Anglophone countries, especially Ghana and Nigeria. Rather, target France, because at the end of the day, it holds such a significant strategic benefit in terms of what Russia can gain and what China can gain. So they will engulf the Anglophone countries with a lot of conflict. And so even though you're not part of it, you will feel the pinch of it. So I'm seeing this as the fact that this is the Western and the international system exploiting Africa again. The coup makers are pandering to Russia and to China. The Anglophone countries, Ghana and Nigeria, obviously are pandering to the West. What is our strategic interest? And you know what is painful in the history of Africa is that first we suffered colonialism. Then it brought about slavery and all the problems that came with it. Then in 1884, this is exactly about 139 years now, yes, the Western countries sat down in a 4-month conference in Berlin and decided to draw boundaries in Africa and share the countries according to who gets what. This is 139 years ago. We are back in this same scenario where this time they are not here to bring a gun or come physically to colonize you and steal your gold and take it to London and give it to the Queen. They are not here to do that. It is something a lot more sophisticated. There are resources that we need, okay? If we can get these Africans to fight among themselves, okay, if we can get the people who have been eating for over 100 years in Africa to turn against those people, we open a chance for ourselves in that region. What is Wagner doing in Burkina and Mali? They are protecting they say they are protecting the country, whilst in exchange they are getting gold. Is that not it? How different is that from the Western countries that came here, colonized our people, took our human resource, the best of it, and took our physical resources and went away with it? There's absolutely no difference. That's why I'm saying that those who support this war and those who are against it, we all don't seem to see the strategic thinking of the Western countries, of the international system in all of this. At the end, Africa will lose. We are just walking away from one exploiter to the other. We don't seem to have a strategic benefit in this. These guys demarcated our borders. Look, no system in the world has been able to survive and expand and become powerful without joint forces. Look at the United States. They are called the United States because they were states that came together to recognize that there's strength in numbers. So if they did not form one state, they were going to be weak. What happened to the European Union? They recognized that there was strength in numbers. and that if they did not come together, they were going to be weak. What happened to the Soviet Union? They realized that the Soviet Union was powerful because of all the countries that formed the Union. And once the Union collapsed, Russia became less powerful. Russia was more powerful than the Soviet Union was more powerful than Russia. Once they collapsed and the boundaries collapsed, Russia became a smaller force in international politics. What do we see in Russia? In China? China is made up of various states that form the Republic of China. We are still in Africa dealing with individual countries because of 1884. They demarcated our boundaries and they put different languages in our mouth. I work in international risk center. When you travel from Ghana to Senegal and you're Anglophone, they look at you with so much suspicion. Are you Nigerian? Oh, we don't like Nigerians. They are this, they are that. You travel to Togo, you can't speak their language. They look at you, you're already odd in your own continent. There's Portuguese here, there's Afrikaans in South Africa. Our boundaries are even more serious when you look at it in terms of language. We can't seem to come together. And so long as Africa remains what it is, we will always be colonized. And for me, the conflict in Africa is a march towards a second raid on our resources and our material, and of Africa's resources. And this is through these kinds of deniable conflicts where you stop this. Go look at what is happening in Zambia. Zambia is now almost speaking Chinese. Okay? So while Russia is starting all these conflicts, which we, poor Africans, will now still use our funds to now go and fight against our next door neighbors, China is building up debt so that they can hold Africans as puppets. If China decides today that this IMF program with this IMF program, Ghana IMF program, they don't support it, all they need to do is to say, I don't support this project, and for that reason, they will be calling Ghana like a puppet. You come here, you do this, you do that. Okay? So this is what we are experiencing. Africa is being recolonized right under our eyes. And our leaders this time are not as alert and are not as sophisticated as those who fought for independence for Africa in those days are. And this is why you are seeing these symptoms, where a president with no strategic objective enters a war. And the modern concept of war, Senna, is different. You have a situation where a small drone that costs $5,000 is killing 10 soldiers, 20 soldiers at a time. People are building an army of no soldiers. And we are with a small, tiny 15,000 military, not all of them not even fit for war, are flexing our muscles against our own African brothers. And they themselves are also selling out to another power broker in the international system. And so you realize that we Africans don't have a vision of our own. We have no strategic aim. We will continue to fight ourselves, use our meager resources to do things of this nature. You are sitting here, you don't even have money to pay your military contractors. You go into war. You see the negotiation. I heard you mention the negotiations between the Islamic clerics and the junta in Niger. Yes. Look, I can tell you, it's a typical Russia strategy. Open dialogue. Use that period of dialogue to build sufficient backup in the case. Because what is Tinubu saying? That war is still on the card. If war is still on the card, as we know in war tactics, the one who prepares is the one who wins. So you open this innocuous dialogue with these Africans, ECOWAS people. It will take a couple of 100 days. Within the 100 days, we will fly ammunition, we will fly equipment. You prepare for them. And when you are ready, call off their bluff and let them come to Niger and take them on a very long, protracted conflict. Listen, war costs money. War is a lot of money. And those monies don't come by the thousands. One armored personnel carrier cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. You're running an economy that has Bank of Ghana, your whole central bank running losses. You're running an economy on an IMF mercy or charity. And you are talking about war. Like, these people don't understand. There's common sense. They don't have common sense. That when you send soldiers to war, you must finance it. And the country does not have the money to finance. So what is going to happen? America and the Western countries will now say, oh, we're going to give you money for the war. Look, and they wake up and they call them development partners. Look how much money they've pumped in Ukraine. Okay? Ask if Ghana decides and ECOWAS decides to go and fight in Niger. They will not give them even a quarter. Ukraine is just one country. And America has boldly stated there that for them, their foreign policy is America first. Period. What is Ghana's foreign policy? Non-aligned. Non-aligned to what? And that is why we don't have a strategic reason for going into this conflict. That is why you have our leaders lacking common sense in recognizing that the decisions they are making today will cost the economy. The decisions they are making today will make them even more puppets of the Western countries, because this war cannot be financed by Ghana. We don't have the money. We can't even purchase 200 armored personnel carriers from this economy. We cannot. Okay? You're talking about one drone costs 20 million. You are looking for 300 million, and you're talking about war where Russia and China will be sending drones and shooting your soldiers dead, and you don't have the money, and you were thinking about war.
So what's the best solution at this time?
I think the most important realization we black Africans must, when Nigeria behaves badly, people tend to overlook it. But Senna, the whole black race, okay, the entire black race depends on Nigeria. They are the biggest black democracy in the world. When they fail, a lot of things will go wrong. Okay? So Nigeria is strategic. Ghana is symbolically strategic because what do we have now? Our economy is useless. Our leadership is not strategic. But we're still building on the fact. The reason why Ghana is still respected is not because of leaders like the ones we have now. It's because we had leaders in the past that were so sophisticated, okay, that the West had to assassinate them in order to curtail the development of Africa. So people are giving Ghana the respect because of old glories. Okay? Nkrumah and Co. fought for freedom. Africa went into the face of fighting for its own freedom, only for us to surrender it under a more sophisticated arrangement, deniable conflicts like this, where now you can't blame your colonial masters because they're not here taking your brothers as slaves. They're not here digging your gold physically and taking it to the queen. No. Now, you yourself have invited them here to come and fight in your own arena. In exchange, they dig your gold and they take it away. The same operation is happening in Sudan. Wagner is in Sudan. They fight, they give ammunition, the people fight against themselves, and then they dig gold and send it to Russia. Like, when you think about we black people, there's something fundamentally wrong with our leaders. There's something fundamentally wrong with the way they think. And the moment they get into office, because of the amount of wealth they amass for themselves, like I'm saying, we think individual. You see a community where one person is robbed, right? Somebody is attacked in his house or an armed robbery in the house. We just pass by casually and say, oh, sorry, and that's it. We don't realize that once one person gets attacked in the community, if we all don't give that person the support, the next will be the next house. And it happens. Then the next house is exactly the way we think. That's why it's easy for small band of robbers to terrorize the whole community, because the community thinks individual. So at the end of the day, we are still thinking the way we were when we were colonized. Okay? And when they were colonized, they drew boundaries and put different languages so we cannot communicate and trust ourselves, and gave ourselves pseudo-new masters And now they are back, redemarcating it again. So now, you know that as we speak, in Mali and in Russia, in Mali and in Burkina, they are teaching people how to speak Russian language. So very soon, it will not be French again. It's going to be Russian. If you go to Zimbabwe now, they're teaching them Chinese. Okay? So this is exactly what is going to happen again. We are revisiting 1884. The boundaries are being demarcated again with now different masters and different languages. And we Africans are the ones that we are being used by our own selves to fight our own people. You heard the story about the amount of onions that come from Mali and Niger that are stuck at the border. Okay? So it is going to have an implication on the average Ghanaian, how much you buy tomatoes and you buy onions. And whilst we pay higher prices for this, the Russians and the Chinese are digging uranium, or will be digging uranium and gold and shifting it to their countries so that their citizens can pay lesser for everything. So we black people, Senna, the leaders of today don't think. They have no vision of where, as a community, as a country, as a region, where we are in the state of play in the international system. They go and sit in the Security Council where they can't vote in the United Nations. And they still will pack themselves every year and go and sit there, and they don't have a voting right. And they still call these guys development partners. What these guys have stolen from Africa, if we were to collect interest on it, it has nothing to do with, isn't it amazing? The first African country to achieve independence is the one that now goes back to the same European, Western countries, their former colonial masters, to beg them to bail them out. What is independence without freedom? Political, security, or economic? What kind of freedom is that?
Okay.
So I feel like this war is bigger than what we are seeing. It is an international war. It is going to engulf Ghana and Nigeria. You mark it on the wall, and eventually we are being colonized again right under our eyes.
Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you very much.